No. I think it is time to start. Good morning or good afternoon or good midday, depending on where you're following the webinar on Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the rules, their impacts, and the challenges they raise for companies. Number 2 in a series of webinars. This seems to be a very good time for holding such a webinar, as we have almost 500 registrations. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar. I'm Leena Linnainmaa, the chair of ecoDa, as well as Secretary General of the National Directors Institute Finland. Before going to the details, a few words about the impact of the directive to boards and audit committees, which is of course close to my heart in my work. Boards, companies are facing huge challenges. We all know pandemic, war, all kinds of different crises, climate change in particular. On the other hand, boards need to focus for a profitable future in the long term. And it is a big question how to balance the profitable future strategic work with ever-increasing reporting requirements. The question is, do companies and boards find the reporting requirements merely as a burden, or is it also a tool for finding opportunities? Because as we all know, this situation has huge opportunities. There is private money, there is public money, there is place for innovation, and it is up to the boards and companies to use these opportunities so that we can all benefit from the innovations and reach a more sustainable future. Considering the ever-increasing reporting requirements, as said, one of the questions is that audit committees' role is getting bigger and bigger, and until now, some small listed companies have not had audit committees. So my question is it possible in the future to have a board, listed company board, without an audit committee? Also, the director's background, especially audit committee members' background. Often there are CFOs, etc. But when have they finished their operational work? How aware are they, in fact, of the new requirements? Is there enough awareness? We are talking of a very successful top-level people who may believe that they have a lot of knowledge, which is of course true, but is there an understanding and a motivation to learn new things? Some countries have training requirements for directors and others not. I come from a jurisdiction where there are no formal training directors for directors to keep up to date. So this also means that the National Directors Institutes have a huge role, as well as the ecoDa's new European Board diploma, where you can keep yourself up to date. And also I would like to mention that there is a big question, at least in some countries, about audit committee fees. Are there enough considering the new work? Also, for myself, I consider it's a big challenge to make directors go beyond their comfort zone. If I organize an event on IFRS and climate change, I don't get registrations as much if I organize an event on geopolitics where a general is speaking. So this is something that working with hugely successful people, we need to unfortunately keep in mind that there are detailed, challenging, demanding new requirements coming, but also considering all the time that there are huge opportunities involved in this area. A few words about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Of course, we will shortly have excellent experts who will be much more knowledgeable, but anyway, a few words. On 5th of January this year, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive entered into force as an update of the non-financial reporting directive. So it was not fully a new thing, but a quite demanding update. Now there is a stronger focus on inside-out aspects. This refers first to the understanding of the sustainability relevant impacts of the company's activities and the understanding of the impact of sustainability aspects on the business performance, business results, and the situation of the company. This called as double materiality. Also, a broader set of large companies as well as listed SMEs will now be required to report on sustainability, approximately 50,000 companies in total. So this is a huge number. It will be mandatory for companies, those companies affected by this directive, to have an audit of the sustainability information, limited level of assurance, of course, that they report. Companies subject to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive will have to report according to the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which will be adopted. The first set will be adopted in June 23. As you notice, I keep repeating these long wordings of this directive and standards, etc. The abbreviations are very difficult. There are so many of them going on that. It's a learning experience surely for everybody. The Commission, the standards will be adopted in 23 and the impacts will be on reporting in 25, covering year 24. And the Commission should adopt a second set of sustainability reporting standards by means of delegated acts by June 24, specifying complementary information that undertaking should disclose about sustainability matters and reporting areas where necessary, and information that is specific to the sector in which an undertaking operates. So there will be some common standards and some separate standards for the different sections. The Commission should review those sustainability reporting standards, including the reporting standards for small and medium-sized undertakings every 3 years, to take into account of relevant developments, including the development of international standards. Of course, this whole international scene is other questions. There is surely a vastness of information that will need to be disclosed. Everybody who has read the directive knows that it is quite demanding and detailed. Double materiality assessment, sustainability time-bound targets, forward-looking information, business model and strategy to ensure that they are compatible with the limiting of the global warming to 1.5 centigrade in line with the Paris Agreement, and the objective of achieving climate neutrality by 2050, role of the administrative, management and supervisory bodies with regard to sustainability matters, the due diligence process implemented with regard to sustainability matters. Also, the inclusion of the management report is a director's liability, meaning that will be the director's duty to make sure that the appropriate management report has been issued. So I have already mentioned something of the timeline, but the first companies, the ones already in the scope of the non-financial reporting directive, will have to apply the new rules for the first time in 24 financial year for reports published in 25. New CSRD large entities, including non-EU entities listed on an EU regulated market, first report published early 26 for the 25 financial year. Listed SMEs, including non-EU entities listed on an EU regulated market, first report published early 27 for financial year 26. And non-EU groups, first report published early 29 for financial year 28. And the directive is being transposed in many countries. For example, in my own country, it's under consultation, and our institute will answer. And we have noticed, for example, that my country will include cooperatives, larger cooperatives in this. So please follow your country. It might not be just listed companies. You might have a surprise if you're not following the developments. So that was a short overview of the CSRD. And it is my honor to introduce our distinguished panelists to you. First of all, Emmanuel Thierry has over 20 years experience providing assurance and advisory services to international clients. Since 2022, he has taken the role of CSRD task force leader at Mazars. He's also the global sustainability audit leader at Mazars and an audit signing partner for large international clients established in France, notably in the banking sector. Prior to taking this role, Emmanuel was the managing partner of Mazars in Japan, where he has been located for 10 years, leading the development of the firm from 20 to 200 staffs and partners. Whereas Emmanuel started his career in Paris, he qualified as a CPA while being second to the New York office, where he spent almost 7 years, notably supporting European banks at the time of the subprime crisis. So welcome, Emmanuel. And second, Tina Mabraki is a portfolio director of Mytilineos SA and FBX LLC, as well as strategic advisor on climate and ESG governance to White Oak Global Advisors and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Tina is a C-suite executive with 25 years of experience in global capital markets, private finance, and global supply chains, with a track record of building successful multi-billion-dollar businesses globally. Tina is chartered director, member of the EU ecoDa Director Circles, and fellow of Chapter Zero UK. She holds an MA and BA from Oxford University, MSc in Finance from London Business School. So, wow, so we certainly have experts here. And now a few words about the household rules here. We will have 3 different sections. First, we will discuss how boards and specialized committees will adapt to the new roles, followed by a Q&A. Then how to get to the ESRS reporting right, followed by a Q&A, and how to get everybody aligned, followed by a Q&A. So we really hope for an interactive webinar. Please use the Q&A function when you have a question, not the chat function. There are 2 separate ones on your screen. So the Q&A function, please use it. We wish to have questions, and we have reserved time for the Q&A sessions. So now without further ado, I will give the floor to Emmanuel and Tina, and I believe Emmanuel will start first, and then you will give space also to Tina. Please, Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lina. It's great to be here with you. This is indeed a very important topic, and the number of attendees today is again the demonstration that people are interested in ESG reporting, but also CSRD more particularly. This is the second webinar. I think maybe we want to mention that there was a webinar yesterday as well that took place that was more on going into the details of the CSRD and ESRS at length. We were together with Patrick Parent from the CAOB, so the Association of Independent Audit Regulators in Europe. And I think it was also quite a success with hundreds of people attending the call, and many people asking tricky questions, which we are trying to respond to the best we can. So I think Lina laid out how we want to organize a discussion today, and that's going to be obviously a discussion between Tina and I, focusing on 3 topics. So we're not going to cover everything. That's not our purpose today. We will focus on the 3 topics that Lina was talking about, starting with our boards and specialized committees will adapt to their new role. I will start each time when we start a topic, I will start with a bit of a reminder of what the rules are, because at the end of the day, the CSRD, it's a new rule. And it's a new rule that will apply, and that there will be a compliance requirement for many companies. And Lina alluded to how large and how many companies will be impacted. It's going to be thousands of them, and thousands more than the NFRD before. So that's why it's important to keep in mind what are the rules. And Tina will be sharing her experience as a board member and what she sees as well as challenges in those areas. So let me start maybe with what the new rules say about the boards and the specialized committees. One concept to keep in mind is ESRS. So ESRS are the European standards, sustainability reporting standards. Those are the new standards that will frame the reporting requirements for sustainability statements. And ESRS 2 in particular puts boards and committees under the spotlight with transparency requirements on the roles and responsibilities of these bodies and how they address sustainability matters. To be honest, a lot of that is not completely new. When you look at the disclosures from the largest companies, there is already quite a lot that is being disclosed. So that's something that you will recognize in terms of what those obligations are, right? But maybe a few comments and a few precisions on that. First one is some of the disclosure requirements will be about the composition and the diversity of those bodies, about what are the roles and responsibilities, in particular with regards to managing what we call the IROs, including the management of the processes around the IROs. So IROs is impact, risk, and opportunities. So that shows again that the bodies we are talking about, well, they will need to understand those concepts quite well, because it will be disclosed exactly what they do with those concepts. And also, and that's very important, and I'm sure Tina will talk about that later on, there is a disclosure requirement about the expertise of this administrative management and supervisory bodies on sustainability matters and the access to such expertise and skills. So basically that means that it is mandatory, or it is going to be mandatory with the CSRD, that the boards disclose how expert they are in those areas. Sometimes it's not new. I've seen many reporting doing that already, but here that's going to be very much standardized and clear as per the regulations. So you have plenty of other disclosures that will be necessary, obviously, with regards to boards and committees, and some of them are again very usual that you will see classification between executive, non-executives, and so on and so forth. But one of the key points is to ensure the availability and appropriate skills and expertise. That's what we find in ESRS 2, what we call Gov1, and that's a new vocabulary as well that people will need to be familiar with. And in ESRS 2 Gov2, so that's a second set of disclosure requirements, you will find requirements about how those bodies are informed on sustainability matters and how these matters are being addressed. So that means by whom, what is the frequency of information of the board, for instance, on sustainability matters, what is the implementation of the sustainability due diligence process, and so on and so forth. So there is a requirement to disclose that information. Same thing, there is a requirement to disclose how the impacts, risks, and opportunities are being overseen in the strategy and in the decision. And that's something that's quite important. And we were talking about that earlier on with Tina. This is not only a matter of purely ticking the box in a checklist. It's also about how and that's clearly stated. This is also the responsibility of the administrative management and supervisory bodies, how those bodies oversee the implementation of the sustainability strategy in the overall strategy of the company. So that's really something that should be game-changing and not just a tick-the-box approach. Typically, that will lead also to very clear and specific disclosures about which impacts, risks, and opportunities have been actually reviewed by the different governance bodies, for instance. So there is a responsibility and something that you can point to for each and every one. So a lot of that already exists in many reporting frameworks that we see for the largest companies. But think about one thing: this reporting framework will be also applicable to private companies, not only to public companies. So this information, that's really also something that's going to change the entire economy, because those questions will have to be asked not only for the large listed companies, as a DAX 40, CAC 40, or whatever big companies we have in Europe, but also for much smaller companies from 250 people. So I maybe just want to put the framework of what it entails. Tina, maybe you want to have a first comment on that?
What I will say to you, Emmanuel, first of all, your experience is coming out very clearly here, in that your audit's attention to detail comes out very clearly. So, you know, if people are taking notes already, I think they're on a very good path towards making the framework about how to go about applying CSRD here. I would love to step back a bit, and obviously I'm not going to talk a lot, but I will draw you into the conversation, and Lena as well. My issue with the way that CSRD is being presented is that this is the new regulation. I think that's wrong. I think what CSRD is doing is providing a framework for what is a fundamental challenge and a fundamental adaptation process that companies have to go through if they want to be around in the next 3, 5, 10 years, and God knows what's going to happen after that. So I think what you're doing, Emmanuel, is fantastic in providing the framework about how to zoom in to what the output would look like. But fundamentally speaking, especially as directors, what we really want to be focusing on is the inputs. What is asked of us here today? What we're talking about is, we know that our business is going to change one way or another, because our customers are changing, because our supply chain is changing, because the communities affecting us or giving us our permits are changing, and because the regulator is changing, because our bankers are changing, because our equity analysts are changing. Every way you look at it, things are changing. So what we need to understand here is that we're going through a change management process. Once you understand that, then you need to understand strategically, what does climate mean for me? If we know what strategically climate means for us in our materiality, in our scenario analysis, in the outputs, in the 3 categories, physical, transition, and liability, then you start synthesizing what potentially good looks like for me 5, 10, and 15 years from now, what good looks like for me. Then once we start going through that process of change and change management and what that means by bringing it back to the present, then it becomes much easier to start talking about how you fulfill these compliance obligations on disclosures. If you have nothing to disclose, then you start making up disclosures. That's when it's the perfect storm for greenwashing. The idea here is that you use this as an opportunity to see what is relevant for your business, what your business would look like if it wants to be sustainable in the next, call it 7 years, and then how you reverse engineer the changes that need to happen today so that you achieve your target 7 years hence. And the role of the board is critical here in a way that it's almost a wake-up call for board performance. We have seen in the wake of the last, 3 months, a barrage of governance failures that shouldn't be with us after all these years. And what was supposed to be sustainability as a fashion kind of a word is a realization that some companies are no more. So sustainability becomes a binary outcome. It's here or it's not here. People have lost money, no question. So sustainability has a very tangible economic value to it. And that's, we can talk about double materiality, Emmanuel, at depth here. But fundamentally speaking, let's make sure that this is a very meaningful and very deep engagement process that starts with the chairman or the chairwoman of the board, that sets the tone, sets the agenda, sets the annual aspirations, sets the midterm aspirations, and how that chair works with the committee chairs so that we don't start talking about satellites and everyone does a bit of their own, and then God help us when we have to synthesize the annual report. But it's an integrative process that starts with risk, starts with audit naturally, feeds in from the talent committee, feeds in from any other committees, ethics committees. There are a lot of committees out there these days. But no matter what, chairs have to come in together, integrate the process, and then the outcome will be much, much smoother, and it will trickle down through the whole organization. Emmanuel, challenge me.
No,
Let's wake up the audience.
As you can all see, we are playing a bit controversy here, where I am playing more on the compliance side, and Tina is playing more on the strategic side of the regulation. And typically jumping on what Tina just said and going back a little on the framework which has been created. I think the parallel or the image of what Tina has described can be found in the key concepts which are being carried by the CSRD, which are double materiality, but also the search and the management of the impacts, risk and opportunities, because that's where the strategy will be derived from, and that's also how it's going to be the structuring of the approach is kind of mandated. And that's something that's quite important actually when you think about it, because, and that's also part of the responsibilities of the auditor of the sustainability statements later on, it's also looking at the process, and the process through which the board and the management teams are going through in order to make sure that the disclosures are correct and that the strategy that is being disclosed in the statements is actually the one that is being enacted. One thing, however, to keep in mind is that a CSRD does not mandate a certain direction. For instance, there is a mandatory disclosure of the position and the strategy of the company with regards to the objective of climate neutrality by 2050, which is one of the big objectives of the Green Deal. However, this is the board, this is the company's decision to define what they want to do with that objective. So I think, again, it's going back to the key concepts that were derived from the Green Deal, that were derived from also the necessity of the economy, is to make sure that we have the tools, and the CSRD, the taxonomy, and other regulations are those tools that exist to incentivize, to create the transparency necessary for allocation of capital and making different decisions. These different decisions are still the responsibility of the board and of the management. And that's something that's quite important. The CSRD indeed, and the ESRS in particular, are just structuring the way it's going to be reported about.
And I think, Emmanuel, I mean, it was nice and playful what you said about, like, you know, the compliance versus the strategy here. But fundamentally speaking, your role as an auditor is crucial here, because the auditor's role will look effectively. What we're really talking about here is just another aspect of economic materiality or financial materiality. And you need the fundamental eyes forensic eyes of an auditor to help you understand, first of all, what do you have? Where are your gaps? What's your governance? What are your systems, your processes, your safety nets, your key safety nets, so that you get where you're supposed to get? There is a framework out there, that's CSRD. There's another framework out there, which is your peers, which is industry-wide, which is agnostic, sector agnostic as well. As Emmanuel, you are soon to jump in and say. And then it's your unique direction, because now you have a new playing field. What are you going to be? How are you going to position yourself to take advantage of that new playing field? I think, and we had a very interesting discussion just before the webinar started about how different regions are approaching climate. So in the States, the IRA brought a completely new angle to the conversation between the two parties. All of a sudden, from a partisan conversation, it becomes a unique economic opportunity, which is what it is, and a competitive advantage race, which is what it is. So the last thing you want to do is you be microscopic and look at how am I going to get away with things, as opposed to and let the time roll by until you've fallen behind versus your competition, fallen behind versus the needs of your customers, fallen behind versus the requirements of your supply chains, and so on and so forth. So I think your critical eye, Emmanuel, is very important here in order to help guide the conversation within the boards, guide the competencies required within the boards, the processes within the boards. Everyone talks about board directors. What's the role of the corporate secretary here? Critical. They connect the dots. They connect the information from one committee to the other and back to the plenary board. They set the tone. We usually have annual works, schedule of work set out for the year. Maybe this year we'll just have to play it slightly differently for the next 18 months until we gear up to the new realization that we need to have new competencies on the boards. And companies like Mazars are absolutely critical in the process because they provide tailored input, but it's down to us as directors to help steer the conversation and drive from the manuals and the wonderful manuals of this world what we really need in order to tailor a path going forward. Because the last thing you want is a cookie cutter report, cookie cutter disclosures, cookie cutter strategic process.
That's
soon to lose the train. Soon to lose the train.
think-
That's the perfect way to lose the train.
Thank you, Tina. Emmanuel, we have actually many questions here, unless, Emmanuel, you have something something that you really, otherwise
let's follow the timetable.
Yes, yes.
We've thrown it out of the window already, but let's try to retrieve it a bit.
Yes, I will read the questions. First, there is a comment from Jana Skakalova. For large companies, it is nothing really new, but it's not at all the case for companies subject to CSRD and not to the previous NFRD. And there are thousands of such companies. And this is, of course, something that needs awareness raising. And also my question that if you don't have an audit committee yet, should you start having one? And then there's Enamari Trixel with CSRD and all it involves, taxonomy, etc. I see the risk that companies get bogged down with reporting and do not have enough capacity to make progress on the subject, especially smaller companies which have not been subject to an NFRD. What do you think? I think this was a touch a little bit also an awareness raising and of the financial opportunities, and investors are really interested in the targets, objectives, etc. So, but do you have additional comments to this? We have other questions here also.
If I may jump on that very quickly, I think the comments that were made are very correct. The march for companies that were not subject to NFRD is going to be very high. So it's going to be a big step for them to be able to do that CSRD reporting, and they will be. So that's why also that's the sense of the CSRD. They start 1 year later, right? So they can also benefit from the big boys or big companies' experience to learn from that and to be able to move forward with that. So I think, yes, it's going to be a big change. I think it's going to be, what I'm afraid about is that for smaller companies, it's going to be a pure tick the box approach, while this is going to be critical for them in the near term to be able to keep their clients and to get the financing, because the banks are going to look very closely at information from the CSRD reports, from the taxonomy especially, to do their credit allocation, and to do also, at some point of time, I'm pretty sure there will be also some interest settings that will be based on this kind of information because of all the GAR story. So that should be taken seriously as a strategic matter, but because of the challenges that will come in the first place, I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of pure compliance approach for smaller companies.
I think what you're saying, Emmanuel, is very interesting. What I've noticed in one of my boards is that already, especially since we're reporting our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, we are actually engaging, or we are committing the governance structure of our suppliers to make assurances to us that the information that they are providing to us is correct. So already, via the process, and CSRD is not in play or yet, but already if we've committed the governance of our suppliers, we know then that they know rather that this is a strategic issue for them if they want to keep us as clients. So it becomes an existential issue. Now, is it going to be disproportional for the small companies versus the large companies? Yes, but it becomes even more existential because they don't have that many avenues. They don't have that many sources necessarily of clients. They don't have that many sources of funding, everything that you just said. But again, to get bogged down into the process rather than the essence, I think is to lose sight of what's really important here. And I think that's where help from the likes of your companies are very important in order to help prioritize, put a framework. We know that the requirements of them are coming later. We know that there will be teething problems, no question about it. And the process will be smoothening out as we speak. So it would just have to go through the journey. But to think that, oh my goodness, this is unfair for me because I'm a small SME, it just puts the mindset in the completely wrong footing here.
Oh, okay, we are very much running out of the time, but there are still interesting questions, and I will ask for a very short answers. Jon Vedemacher is asking, how do you view the role of internal audit? Short answer.
So that's something we are discussing later on, actually.
Oh, okay, if that is later on, that we will save that. And Hannu-Ylänne, what do you think are the most fundamental changes from this directive and ESRs at the CFO level of the company?
That's also in the next section.
Okay.
Plan for that in the next section.
Okay, we will do that. Kathleen de Lange, how could you raise rapidly, efficiently a systems change thinking within the board? Climate, biodiversity, pollution, water, etc., are all symptoms of the same problem. I think this has been to some extent covered already, and we are of course working here to raise the awareness.
But I mean, I think, Catherine, thank you very much for your question. I think what is fascinating is come up a lot in conversations is that in terms of, instead of thinking as industries or as products, it does make sense. It forces you to think in a systems approach. What is the whole supply chain that unifies to a final product? And once you think as a system, then you proliferate your strategic thinking, because all of a sudden you have much bigger options about where your pivoting can go as a company. And thinking in systems rather than this is what I'm occupying with it in a small segment of the ecosystem, is not commensurate with the multiple and multifaceted challenges that climate brings into you, especially with regards to transition. So I think within the strategic thinking, which part of what part of the system are we occupying, and what direction we want our company to take within the systems approach. I think that's a fascinating first conversation to have at a strategic session at the board.
Okay, thank you. And now we will save questions to the next sections, as was correctly mentioned, that they belong more there. We're now going to the how to get the ESRS reporting right. And Emmanuel and Tina, please give your opinions on this, and then we will continue the Q&A. Please, Emmanuel and Tina.
So we're going to continue playing a little the same game. So I'll go with the rules, and Tina will go with the principles and the strategy, right? So at the end of the day, the putting together the sustainability statements, this is also making sure that what is being communicated in the annual report is the actual reflection, the fair reflection and representation of what the company is doing and of the impacts of the company. So this is quite important, obviously, that we make sure that this improves, because as Tina was mentioning earlier on, there are some serious concerns about greenwashing these days, with a lot of the disclosures which are being made by companies. And when I look at some of the disclosures I've seen as well, for instance, where they select and they pick up what they consider to be material impact, the clients, in a way that is completely inconsistent, for instance, with their peers in the same sector, because they know they will look bad. Today, that's okay. Tomorrow, thanks to the CSRD, thanks to the ESRS, that's going to be much stricter, and it's going to be much less about communication, whether internal or external communication, but it's going to be really about reporting on things that matters. And that's what is important. So when you start reporting on things that matters, what is important to keep in mind is that you need to have the right framework to get the ESG reporting right. For that, the CSRD aims at putting sustainability reporting on equal footing with the financial reporting quality through mandatory reporting standards, assurance, we talk about that, the auditors, and the expectation of internal controls existing over the sustainability statements. So that's a big change. So we have the standards, we have the auditors, we have internal control, and that's something that is at the core of the CSRD, to make the ESG reporting right, to avoid greenwashing, and thus to have a basis for communication which players on the market can rely on. Banks, we are talking about that earlier on, and investors can rely on, because this is not going to be only greenwashing and internal communication, but actual actions. So there are many obligations about disclosure of internal control, and that's maybe where it's starting. And I think internal control is going to be a big change, where the boards and specialized committees will have a significant role as well. There are disclosures to be made about what is the internal control process around sustainability reporting production. There are plenty of other information to be put together. The point being that there is a need to ensure completeness and integrity of data and accuracy of the estimated results. If you look at sustainability reporting, there are a lot of estimation. A lot of estimates here and there, a lot of data which are used from the value chain, and therefore it's very difficult. It's much more difficult to some extent to make sure it's right than to make sure the financial information is right. And there is one last point as well, which belongs to quality and making sure that the ESG reporting is right, is also doing it on time, that it's done in a timely manner with the financial information. It's not always the case these days. So those are really some of the key requirements that we are looking at with the ESRS to make sure that the reporting is correct and is a fair representation of the actions of the company, but also, and I think that's quite important, that the information that is being reported can be monitored, because when you start believing in this information, then those are the KPIs you can really start monitoring, because you know they are correct. You know, if, as of is the case today, very often, You are not really clear that those are the right KPIs that are reported on, that the calculation is subject to a limited perimeter and not the entire perimeter of the consolidated group, which is also often the case. I mean, there are plenty of limitations, that it's not comparable to your peers, that it's not comparable to other companies. Frankly, nobody wants to start looking at it. The boards and directors and even the management, they consider that, they put that aside because they don't believe in the data. So believing in the data, in the quality of the data, will be one of the critical steps. And for that, there is a need to put together a more serious internal control system. Maybe Tina, you have comments on the ESG data, among other things, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what you drew out, Emmanuel, is the effectiveness of governance that has to be internalized, and it also has to be communicated externally. That's really fundamentally what we're talking about. And in a similar way, and again with your forensic experience as an auditor, in a similar way that you have your data governance for financial disclosures, you would need to start emulating your data governance for your non-financial disclosures. Mm-hmm. And the concept of financial materiality has to be defined very clearly, so you know what you start identifying. It's important also to start talking about your sensitivities. I mean, you start really from the sensitivities to climate in your business and what your business in the next 5 or 7 years would look like to begin with. And then you pull in the materiality element. And from the materiality, then you start weeding out what the internal controls are required in order to produce your data governance at large. So then you need your systems, no question. You need your access points. You need your aggregation points. You need the taxonomy to kick in so that you can put things into order, and then you start including them in the whole process of the financial disclosures. What I have seen as a practical note is that, especially in the area of data at large, a lot of boards are looking at putting or instituting data committees. And I think that's a very valuable lesson to learn, to the extent that there is data available in your company that you're not mining to begin with. That's an opportunity. To the extent that external data now are being commissioned of you and you have to look at their integrity and their validity, it does make sense to put new governance systems or internal controls in place. Again, data governance or your committee, your data committee can look into that. What you make out of your data and what opportunities you get out of your data, equally important. And then naturally the tail process would have to be the reporting, because if your whole existence is around reporting, again, you've missed a phenomenal opportunity to reposition your business. It would be, I think I'm repeating the same point, but it would be a shame to leave it at that, an absolute shame. And time will keep coming, eating back at you. Meteorological data to correlate your microsensitivities to your footprint. What does that mean about your insurance? Insurance claims and what new insurance you need to take out. Resilience and how you build that resilience for response to issues. Obviously, we're talking about ESG here, so the S element is equally important. What metrics you derive as a result that are material, quantitative, and critical for your business and strategic for your business. All of these, when you do the processing right and you have the right data, you can actually defend them with data, and then they can become part of the language of the company at large, and then they become embedded.
But maybe one question to you. What do you think about the current quality of that data? The current quality of the data.
The current quality of the data is extremely variable. We all know that, and that's an opportunity to change things. And I think that's where, Emmanuel, your background and your discipline becomes very critical. And of course, I don't mean to to prop you up here, but it's quite obvious that that's really what a good board would request your services.
But
you know, you are an agent of climate proofing the company by soliciting the right questions, by putting the right seeds in the board thinking, and by defining the right level and quality of outcomes. So it's a very symbiotic process that has to run with a lot of curiosity, intellectual curiosity.
I'm just wondering, and I appreciate it. Of course, auditors and consultants are very important, and essentially because the ESG data is quite different from what we know, but typically there might be also an important, and I also that's to make reference to one of the questions we've seen earlier, an important player in that game, which is kind of new sometimes because he was not the key driver of the ESG reporting before, is the CFO. What do you think to be the expected changes with the role of the CFO in the context of complexification of the ESG reporting, and that the ESG reporting is going to be more central than ever and is going to be maybe better monitored than in the past?
That's again where you have to start looking at the CFO as the tip of an iceberg, right? That tip of the iceberg is the CFO, but behind the CFO, you have the Chief Sustainability Officer that has helped each division to have the right processes, the right targets, and the right metrics to define the process, to define progress made, or to monitor progress made. And when you have these two, or that's the tip of the iceberg, is the CFO. Underneath is the sustainability officer. But what they're doing is they're harnessing the efforts that are happening throughout the company. And as was rightly pointed out, if you have the right planning, if you have the right metrics, if you have the right systems to report, if you have the right processes to escalate, if you have a very engaging internal audit function that is another pair of eyes in the organization and raises strategic issues, these strategic issues enter into the executive committee's agenda and they're looked at with curiosity. When you have situations where the organization has the ability to bring up failures up to the executive ranks as learning processes, then the CFO's job is a conductor of an orchestra. If you look at it any other different way, then that's where you start having frictions in the organization. Am I beautifying the process? Of course I'm beautifying the process, but the steady state should look like that.
Maybe one quick comment on that. We are observing among our clients that there is a bit of a move in terms of responsibility, where typically you had the sustainability team sometimes directly reporting to the corporate secretary and in charge of ESG reporting, but also defining the ESG strategy and so on and so forth. And notably with the taxonomy, which has been a game-changing element, we are observing a move of the ESG reporting role from the sustainability team to the finance team, because this is you now as being a reporting function more than purely financial. It's financial and extra financial. Role of the reporting function and the monitoring, because it's not only about reporting, right? And I think we agree on that one, at least. It's also about monitoring those KPIs. And it's also about monitoring those KPIs and monitoring the progress. And that's all the purpose of having this.
Absolutely.
And the sustainability team. So there is always a question about what is the future role of the sustainability team. My view and hope is that the sustainability team is going to be, instead of being focused on the difficulty of the ESG reporting, which are real, and we've talked about that already, that they focus more on the change and the transformation.
Precisely. I could not agree more.
To make the company more sustainable, so be more part of the strategy team.
Precisely.
Than the reporting.
Precisely. And hopefully the role of the sustainability team is to help provide a forum for commerce and risk to sit together, bash heads, in inverted commas, until they understand and they define the new risk appetite of the company. So what does risk reward look like? It's not just rewards, financial reward versus the previous risk that we had defined, but it's an extra risk involved. So that risk reward equation then cascades throughout the whole organization. And fundamentally, that change management, I mean, in principle, the ultimate target, and I'll say that, and it might sound a bit controversial, the ultimate target of the Chief Sustainability Office is to make itself extinct, in that it's been so well ingrained in the organization that it's just part of the DNA. And then what it looks like is new R&D. What does the future look like 5 years hence and 5 years hence? So it's always an agent of change, but the fundamental role of switching the mindset of the company from minimal risk reward to an enlarged risk reward that incorporates climate, that incorporates the social aspect, that incorporates, I mean, governance we should have resolved by now, but I mean, we're still learning day by day, my goodness. But anyway, that process, we should have scored in that. We should be scoring in that category.
I'm definitely on the same page on that. And I think what is making me also optimistic, and I'm an optimistic guy, is the fact that the nature and the quality of the data is moving forward and is moving up. That's what I observe. With the certainty of the CSRD, an entire ecosystem is being built. We are seeing thousands of software editors designing ESG reporting tools. We are seeing a lot of companies focusing on carbon footprint and those kind of things. And typically, to answer one of the questions as well, we are seeing also internal audit functions taking over some responsibilities to make sure that this information is going to be correct, because it's the basics. If you don't have correct reporting, if you don't have correct information, well, you can't make decisions. You can't make the accurate decisions. And now we have the internal control framework also. COSO just last week or 2 weeks ago published a guide for internal control over sustainability reporting. So we have this ecosystem that is being built, and that is definitely changing things. And fortunately, on top of that, as you pointed out, and thank you for that, there is also the mandatory audit of this information, which will also help bring the ESG reporting of European companies to the next level, going away step by step from the challenges of greenwashing, which has been the case very often in the past. And because we will have more reliable data, the transformation and the allocation of capital will be more efficient or more aligned with the goals of the EU. And that's what I like. Just one last point before maybe we talk more about the audit environment. What I like about the taxonomy, for instance, is that it's a simple concept. It's a concept of alignment with the sustainable goals of the EU, right? And we know those goals, and there are 4 more since last week or the week before that are being drafted. So it's a very simple thing to understand. That's alignment with the goals. So you have your EBITDA, if you want, your key indicator that will help drive information, but that needs to be of high quality.
Absolutely. It is a shame to think.
Very short now, because we will need to go to the Q&A.
Absolutely. No, I'm not going to be short. I'm going to cut myself off and open the floor.
Oh, okay, let's go to the Q&A. Hans Winterhoff is asking, as EFRAG recently announced reference to ISO as methodology to fulfill CSRD, ESRS requirements, and as we already see many corporates using ISO 31000 as their risk management methodology, how can we ensure that corporates are not reinventing the wheel for as well mandatory opportunity management, but apply ISO 56,000 as opportunity management methodology for their sustainability reporting? This is something totally, I'm not aware of this topic, but if you can answer, please.
Well, just maybe looking back at this, that shows again that there has been many frameworks that have been active in the past, overlapping, sometimes conflicting, to prepare the ESG reporting. ISO frameworks were one of the frameworks that were used in some cases, also to conduct some of the due diligence and so on and so forth. I think that now there is a methodology that has been designed by ESRS, and it might make reference to other frameworks like the OECD guidelines for due diligence, or in some cases for ISO. But I believe that they will impose themselves with their own structure. And if the other frameworks do not align with CSRS, they will be discarded to some extent.
And related to methodology, Jordan Harabedianis, do the ESRS recommend a methodology to assess double materiality, which is key to determine the publication or not of many disclosure requirements, indicators as biodiversity, pollution, water, or is it at the discretion of the corporate to publish the approach chosen?
Excellent question.
Yeah. So one thing is that there is a list of mandatory disclosures. So that's also the first thing, which is making ESRS statements stronger. There is a list of things which, because of EU law, because of ESRS, are mandatory. So it's not completely at the discretion of the companies. Second, there is also on top of that, I would say, and screening some of those topics, the IRO approach, but which must follow a very precise process to be disclosed. And that's what I was making reference to earlier, that this process needs to be assessed also by the auditor. Typically, it's a bit like, and sorry for the analogy, which may not be completely right, but when you look at IFRS and the impairment process or the impairment results is valid only if the impairment process has been aligned with what is asked for by the IFRS. So again, here, we're not looking just at the results, we're looking at the process. And that's where also boards and management need to make sure that they understand not only the results, but that they make sure the processes are in place, because they are the guarantee of the accuracy of the results, and that there is not too much cherry picking in what we are disclosing, which is a big risk in ESG reporting.
Okay, and then we have Radameka. Can we keep the CFOs out of the process, since financial extra financial informations need to be addressed by auditors? How to enroll them, how to organize the reporting to make it reliable, how to track and have assurance on information that today are not yet available or hard to get, scope 3, or hard to estimate? The scope 3 question is a very good question.
Yes, well, it's interesting because also the nature of the disclosures are different. If you think about it, when we think about what the CFO has been looking at so far, he's been looking at information which differs quite a lot from ESG reporting. First of all, he's looking at information that he controls, while to make the link with the scope 3 discussion, it's about influence, right? It's about value chain, so it's not control. Second, the CFO has been looking at information which is quantitative, while the ESG reporting includes also a lot of qualitative and narrative information. Third, the CFO has been looking and has been reporting on historical information, while a lot of the ESG reporting is about forward-looking information. So when you put all this together, obviously that is raising plenty of questions about what changes are also needed for the finance department to be an efficient and relevant player in the ESG reporting field. And here again, and that's something that we will talk about, I guess, a little later as well, there is a need for competency upgrade.
Absolutely.
And also for training and so on and so forth. Those are the key changes that we are observing.
Is there any, Shirsha Amerkal, what elements external auditors, verifiers will consider while auditing the ESG reports of the companies? I think you have covered this topic, but is there anything to add?
Well, I think the external auditor is going to be quite a change. Just as a reminder, it's also something that is like for the companies, it's a journey. It's a journey, the external audit, because we're starting with limited assurance, then we are going to reasonable assurance. The principle is more or less that it's going to be the statutory auditors, but it's not a blank check either. There will be a little bit of freedom of choice for the companies, in the sense that they will be authorized, if the member states allow it, they will be authorized to select another auditor or even non-CPA firms in some cases. So the freedom of choice will be there, but there will be a need to make sure that the auditors have the right level of competency. And that's going to be obviously also a challenge, because on the auditor side, it's also a journey. The standards that are going to be applied by the auditors are not there yet. ISA 5000 is still in the drafting mode. So there is a need for this communication together with the auditors. And let's not forget that that will also drive the role of the audit committee. The audit committee, as per CSRD, is not the one selecting the auditor, right? So that's not precise, actually, who is going to select the auditor. My guess is that the audit committee is going to do it because it will make sense, right? But that means also that the audit committee needs to step up and know what is the difference between a sustainability audit and a financial audit. So there are a lot of questions that need to be asked to make sure that the freedom of choice is effective.
Yeah, and following up on that point, Emmanuel, presumably to the extent that the body of information is developing, you need to state your assumptions clearly, and you need to qualify these assumptions to that extent. Can you talk to us about that process as well?
Sorry, I didn't catch it all.
Presumably in the process of building up that body of information that will feed into the sustainability reporting, you will need to have to make some assumptions in the process. Can you talk about how you will be managing the action process that companies will be producing?
And please be very short.
Okay. Well, there are plenty of questions there which are tricky to answer so far, because the standards themselves are not complete yet. I mean, it's becoming stable, and there is also some experience with many of the metrics which are going to be or disclosures which are going to be put together. One of the critical issue that we are facing is the relevance of the input for those assumptions, whereby typically data that is being used is corresponds to averages, to sector data, and so on and so forth. And as long as there is not something that is specific to the company, we will always have to rely on external data providers and making assumptions about whether or not that's the pure accurate data. But again, this is a journey. This is a journey in the sense that the reasonable assurance, which is the most extensive kind of assurance auditors give, will come in place only in 2028. So which means that in the meantime, there will be more and more direct and specific information that will be used by the companies from their supply chains, because for the last 3 or 4 years, they will have been able to gather information from their supply chain through the CSRD and ESG reporting of their supply chain. So I'm seeing that as a journey. At first, auditors will give a limited assurance, which means we have not seen something that looks wrong. And then only in 2028, there will be a positive assurance, so a reasonable assurance where we state this is correct. So this is a journey of progress for the companies and for the auditors.
Thank you. And Hans-Peter has shared a link related to ESRS and ISO. So anybody interested, please go to the Q&A and save the link. And one of the remaining questions that we had was the role of the internal audit, but I think that was perhaps covered already enough. Okay, then we go to the final section, how to get everybody aligned. And this is the big question.
That's a big question. That's mostly a question for Tina. but I'm happy to start with the rules again. And just to remind people that there will be a mandatory disclosure actually as it's very often the case already in practice in Europe. So there will be an obligation to disclose sustainability and more particularly climate change related performance in incentive schemes. So typically what is being put in the incentive schemes of the management of the board potentially, and there will be further disclosures that will be mandatory, giving more details about how these incentive schemes work. Again, this is not an obligation that the management or the board members be incentivized on ESG topics. This is not the point. It is an obligation of transparency and explanation specifically on that topic, but there is no obligation that the CEO of the company will be incentivized on its carbon footprint. That's not the point. So I think it's important to make the difference here. We're still talking about ESG reporting standards, and that's for the board and for Tina to comment on what we are making out of those standards.
I think you're raising a very interesting point, dichotomy about reporting versus mandating climate metrics in the executive compensation, but especially for high emitting companies. How would you make your commitments consistent unless they're part of the incentivization process? And then you have to accompany it with detailed disclosures that are measurable, that are transparent, that are comparable, and all these things that have been well established by the audit experts that signal to the market internally and to the market that you really mean what you're preaching. And I've heard that people say, oh, but this is part of your obligations anyway. Well, we have such a big hill to climb here, mountain to climb, that you actually need to have incentivization now. And if that's performed so well, you can take it off later in time. But for the time being, what we're noticing is that a lot of companies that have ESG metrics into executive remuneration get paid 100% of that, of these metrics. And I would stand to see has been so well across all these companies that they would be awarded 100% of that award. So interesting dichotomy, but fundamentally in time they should start becoming fungible for the companies that have material ESG issues to disclose on. A lot of people, yeah. Sorry.
One quick comment on that, and also to hear about your experience and what you've seen, because I know you've been writing also some papers on that topic. I've seen, for instance, one of my clients giving to their entire staff a kind of ESG linked bonus, or the calculation of one of their incentive schemes being linked to the carbon footprint in this specific case, which I found to be quite interesting, and I'm asking actually for us to check the accuracy of the calculation of the carbon footprint. Is this something that you see as well, or do you see that being kept at management or board level, this kind of scheme, or is it going down?
Fair question. In principle, ESG metrics should cascade throughout the organization, because what is the CEO going to do if the whole organization doesn't follow, right? So you need to make sure that they're cascaded. Now, at the same time, you need to make sure that they are something that the employees can act on. If you're asking me to do carbon footprint, but I'm the HR manager, I have my scope 3, if you will, but directly I don't have scope 1 or scope 2 as an HR director, if you see what I'm saying. But if I am the head of the manufacturing division, I can directly affect, or the head of procurement, I can directly affect which energy providers I choose going forward for my supply chains. So it has to be relevant. It has to be something that the employee can reliably, but it has to be cascaded. And I think the role of there becomes even more significant in saying that individualizing, at least at the divisional level, the remuneration metrics for that division, so that it becomes relevant, it becomes specific. And above all, and that's something, I guess, because we'll start to be wrapping up soon, competencies internally in order to appreciate what you're talking about, Emmanuel, to your clients. So it's all well and good if you're saying, but someone on the other hand has to give it with exactly the same meaning that you were meant to deliver, same accuracy, and follow up on your advice. So the competencies also need to be developed internally in order to receive the advice, in order to initiate the processes, follow the process, develop, monitor the process, and make sure that the whole company has evolved in a sustainable direction. So competency is something developed at board level so that they understand what strategy we're talking about. It has to be resident at the executive committee level, no question, and it has to be cascaded down in specific divisions. Now, I don't like executive remuneration schemes where they said we roll down so and so many amounts of training. What I should care about is the output of the training. Because to train, to say that I've done training, but nothing happened at the end of it, you need output specific remuneration metrics or input specific remuneration metrics, like, for instance, in the UK, produce a transition plan should be part of the bonus of many companies, because it's very specific and encompasses pretty much the CSRD process that you've laid out so far. And that's enough for a year actually to produce a transition plan. So it is an output metric. And you need output metrics for your long-term incentivization as well, in the full understanding that in order to make changes in the future, you have to put the processes now, today. I, as a remuneration committee, incentivize the whole process throughout the company to make sure that the sustainability investment buildup happens now and gets remunerated consistently, specifically, progressively. The targets are stretching by virtue of the analysis and the double materiality dimensions, and then you realize the whole sustainability journey congruent within the organization, consistent. You have propping up here and there in the organization. Then when the reporting process comes up, you don't know how to connect all these dots and communicate a coherent picture, both internally and externally.
And I think to come back to the defense of CSRD and of ESRS, to be able to set up all these incentive schemes that may be much wider and also division by division, as you pointed out, well, you need a relevant and reliable ESG reporting. And also a bit standardized, so that people, when they look at what they are doing in one firm, well, it's something they can compare to what they see in other firms. So I assume that we will see the development of an expertise actually in developing those remuneration schemes, which are quite different from what we have experienced historically, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that this has developed to an extent. It is continuing to developing already to some extent. You can have direct links to scope 1, 2, and 3. You can have EBITDA, green EBITDA ratio. You can have green capex ratio. It's very specific. You can measure them. Mm-hmm. They're financial at the end of the day. You can have revenues, products mix by the green percentage of, and that's climate. On the S part, you also have metrics that you can talk about: retention rate, turnover, sick leave, silent leave. That's an interesting thing. You can start soon enough. We will start developing tools to understand that as well. There are lots of, and obviously governance, again, to perform the most, initiated the longest, But again, I mean, we should bring that back to the fore and make it relevant and encompass the whole process of sustainability via the governance. Again, you have as well to put very specific, precise output targets, not to make remuneration complicated, not more than a few quantitative metrics that you can report against. Underpins become very relevant. So you can reward if bonus have reached a threshold on your ESG metrics. Change, constantly change, so that as soon as you have progress in one, you move on to the next, and you move on to the next, and then it becomes a process of constant upgrading.
Okay, Tina's connection seems to be quite weak for a while, but I hope it doesn't disappear fully. There is related to remuneration, Wolfgang law, regarding achieving objectives. Would you consider it a kind of greenwashing of your company if your company always achieves the ESG goals at 100% or more? And before giving the floor to you both, I would say that those targets, unless the company is superb and the leadership is world-winning leadership, it's not very demanding targets. If year after year, every single objective is fulfilled 100%, I don't know if it's called greenwashing, but regarding remuneration, it's not very demanding targets. And I would be surprised if the investors and shareholders might not react to the remuneration reports at one point or another if everything is always fulfilled. That might raise questions in the AGM when there is a vote on the remuneration reports, that is this good or not. But do you wish to add something, Emmanuel or Tina, related to this topic?
Tina, you want to say something about achieving 100% of ESG goals?
Of course, and then the question, if you can defend them, I asked the question of my boards, and they said, well, look at results. I said, happy. We're stretching, we were specific, we pay. So let's not make this a process by we penalize. Time when it question where you're very show back on level how this KPIs are real, and you have and they're stretching enough, and to the that you can demonstrate this, all the relevant questions have been answered.
Okay. I had some trouble with my screen is saying Tina-Mazars network bandwidth is low. Emmanuel, do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I guess that's what Tina was saying. But I agree with you that if they achieve 100% of the ESG goals, that means the goals are not the right ones. They are probably too low. And second, I don't see how it's possible to have 100% of certain ESG goals, essentially those related to the environment, where there is always something better to be done. And probably on the S side as well, to be honest. So definitely, but that's the role of boards and committees to actually act and make decisions. So for that, they need to be aware of what are the underlying KPIs, what are the underlying qualitative elements of those remuneration schemes. They need to understand how those are calculated, what they mean from a strategic point of view, and that all goes through training and awareness sessions for boards, audit committees, and so on and so forth, so that they can really appropriate and take the ownership of those concepts.
Yes. Indeed, and then there is the question that if the ESG goals are always fulfilled to 100%, how about the other goals? That is there a tradition in the company that the goals are not demanding, and as said, at some point the shareholders, investors might have something to say about this, and it might not be a very nice AGM when a report is not accepted in a vote. And regarding remuneration, I have seen, not often, but I have seen that some company has handprint, not just footprint, but handprint. How much good can they produce? And of course, that depends on the sector you're working in, and there's how to measure it, etc. So there's, but it will be very interesting in the coming next years to see how this will develop, and also how the large investors and shareholders will react to this and what they will demand, because even some, let's say, progressive European politicians said to me that companies are actually ahead of the public sector. So this is something that I think will be very interesting to see how it will develop, and of course companies and directors should be following what others are doing, because it might be changing rapidly, and ESG targets in remuneration, when I'm seeing the statistics, there's a lot more being used than was like 3 years ago. So it's a very quickly changing scene.
It's going to be common.
Yes.
That's my guess. It's going to be
Yes.
a common feature. So there will be differences, more or less, or whatever, but that's going to be a common feature and a must-have. Otherwise, to come back to the checklist approach, you don't tick the box somehow of a good governance if you don't have a ESG linked incentive scheme.
Absolutely. So we don't actually have any more questions here, and everything was covered to be able to close in the agreed time. Tina, in case your connection is good,
Still here.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything you would like to add in a short manner to the discussion or the program today? This is your final word.
My final word would be open-mindedness and curiosity. That would be
open-mindedness and curiosity
with which to approach things, and
yes,
ask the right questions of a plethora of advisors to make sure that you've covered as many angles as possible.
Very, very excellent advice, and adding my going beyond your comfort zone, learning new things. Those are, I think, key characteristics of a good director. And Emmanuel, your final words related to today's topics.
Well, my final advice maybe will be upgrade and extend competencies for management, for board members, to make sure that they are aware of what's coming up, because essentially in the smaller enterprises, so the very big ones have already that level of awareness, but in the smaller companies and smaller groups, there is still quite some work to be done based on my experience.
Excellent. We have had an interesting midday seminar, lots of participants, and thank you, audience, also for your excellent and some very difficult questions. We have been able to cover the topics in the announced time, which I'm very happy about. And one of the things, the topic might seem scary and so on, but the timeline is not very short for the small companies. The large companies already covered by the non-financial reporting directive. They have some additions, but they have the resources, the large ones, and they already have the experience. So it's not as scary as it might sound at the beginning for the smaller ones, because there will be time to learn, and there will be experiences related, for example, for the excellent question related to scope 3 and that sort of thing. So I think in the coming years, it will be a learning experience for each and everybody here, and hopefully the outcome of all of this will be that ESG matters will be in every company's strategic core, and climate change supply chain, human rights, etc., that every company, every director understands that it's their business, it's not somebody else's business. And thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Tina, for your excellent expertise. I'm seeing in the Q&A also thanks and congratulations for your work. So it was a pleasure hosting the event with such excellent specialists in this area. Thank you so much, and until the next event. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. Bye bye. Bye everyone.